Hello and welcome to another tutorial video for Mosaics, this time focusing on creating shapes using our first method I'm going to go through, which I like to think of as big pattern little tiles. And this is your classic Roman or Byzantine style of mosaics, where a comparatively large area is going to be filled with very small tiles in order to create the shapes that we're after. And the major benefit of this method is that it is the easiest for creating shapes, but it does have its limitations, especially when it comes to more complicated shapes. And to demonstrate this, we can use a simple circle as an example. This could be any shape whatsoever, but a circle is a good starting point. And so this little circle that I've got measures 2.5 inches in diameter. It is too big to just use a circular tile for, and so we are going to have to fill it in. So to start off with what is definitely the very easiest way to create shapes with mosaics, and that is just to use a contrasting edge. This is very simply an outline that defines the edge of the shape, which is the part that stands out most to the viewer. Once you have that outline in place, the human eye is so fond of following a line that you can in fact fill the shape with just about any other style of tile and it won't matter. Even if you fill a circle with completely random squares and triangles, the human eye will still just quickly interpret this as a blue circle. And this is particularly useful if you're either creating something very quickly, or you've got bits and pieces of tiles that you want to use up, or if, for example, you're creating a mixed media piece. Now, some tiles do lend themselves particularly well to edging, such as the sticks range, which can be cut down to size, or the micro tiles which you can use to create your shape, and in all honesty, that is the hardest part done. You can then simply fill it in like you're colouring in a picture. The obvious major limitation to this is that it is only going to work in very few situations where you're creating perhaps a modern looking piece and you don't mind having a lot of the grout showing. Also as well, having this very contrasting outline can look a little bit garish and even a tad paint by numbers. And if that's not the style which you're going for, then you will likely have to resort to the tiny tiles method. And here what you need to do is take a good look at your shape and be able to match the size of your tile to the shape that you're trying to create. So for example, sticking with our blue circle theme, we want to create a nice vibrant blue circle using these 12mm Ottoman tiles. And so, placing our tiles and following our outline, and we have already hit a bit of a problem. Number one rule for keeping your mosaics as neat as possible is to keep those gaps all the same between the tiles. And because this circle is too small for these tiles, the gap that we're left with is huge. It is half the width of the tile. And that's even on the largest outside circle, and so the issue is only going to get worse as we get towards the centre. Now we have two choices in order to continue with these tiles. Number one, we can either start cutting at the tiles to remove a triangular wedge from the sides of them so that they fit more neatly together, or we can start to incorporate other shapes of tiles in order to fill in the gaps. Or, to be honest, you could just leave the gaps if you don't mind them. Personally, I do. I don't mind big areas of grout if it is clearly part of the design, like on this heart. But on this dragonfly, for example, these areas where there are gaps really bother me because it's obvious that they shouldn't actually be there. And so to get rid of them, you either need to get cutting those larger tiles down a little bit just so that the edges fit closer together, or filling in the spaces with something else, and you'll still come out with the blue circle that we wanted. But to me at least, my favourite way to create shapes is to simply make the tiles even smaller, much smaller, half the width and half of the length, so that each tile gets cut into quarters in this instance. And you can see that by using really tiny tiles, we have immediately got a much neater circle edge with much more even and smaller gaps. And because the tiles are the right size for the shape now, it is easy to follow that curve without having those unsightly gaps. Also, because we're using very small tiles, it is easier to bring in more colour to the design in a regulated and meaningful way. We can now play around with shading and highlights to make our blue circle that little bit more appealing. Even with this method though, you can see that as you get towards the centre, you will find that even your tiniest of tiles are going to start leaving gaps. And so you're going to need to cut out some minuscule little triangles to fill in the gaps. But because these are so small, they don't stand out. You don't see squares and triangles, you will just see the colour of the circle. And you don't have to individually cut your own tiny tiles neither. You can buy micro tiles if you prefer it, to be honest. But I like the irregular nature of cut tiles. Each one is slightly different and the finished product looks like something a person has made rather than like it's been mass manufactured by a machine. Now obviously, because these tiles started out small in the first place, the process of cutting them down further is going to be getting fiddlier and fiddlier. But you should find that as you get towards the centre, because the tiles were small, you shouldn't have a large area that needs to have gaps filled in. This way, yes, you will have to do some fiddling about with it, but it shouldn't be very much. And if you are looking to cut your own tiles, then it's a good idea to try to find ones that don't have a beveled edge. You want the edge to be as sharp as possible so that you don't have a half smooth and half sharp edges on every single tile. In fact, if I had to give Mosaics an overriding theme, I would say it is all about regular irregularity. You want the tiles to be irregular so that they look handmade, but not so irregular that they become a mess. And this technique works with all manner of different situations and for many different styles. You just need to change the size of your tile to fit the shape, and that will depend very much on what it is that you're creating. On the other hand, where this method completely fails is where you have a very small, complicated design, but you don't want to cut your tiles down until they're just a few millimeters each and it becomes like a micro mosaics project. And so you will likely want to follow the next method we're going to go through, which is what I like to think of as little pattern, big tiles. But we will get to that in the next video. Anywho, I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial. Happy crafting everyone, and I will see you soon.